They say a wedding is a promise, but a vow renewal is a confirmation. It's a declaration to the world that the promises you made all those years ago were not just kept, but were worth making in the first place. I should have paid more attention to who that declaration was really for. It certainly wasn't for me. My part in their story, I would soon learn, was not to be a cherished guest at the celebration, but merely to be the caterer, and a caterer who could be canceled without notice. It all began with a burst of joy. My son Michael and his wife Jessica were approaching their 25th wedding anniversary. To celebrate, they wanted to renew their vows with a beautiful party at their lakeside home. And my gift to them, the centerpiece of the entire celebration, was to be the cake. Not just any cake. I was a baker by trade and by soul. I promised them a magnificent 3-tiered masterpiece, a testament to their enduring love, a project I poured my entire heart into. For 3 full days, my small kitchen was a whirlwind of flour, sugar, and hope. I baked the delicate almond sponge, I whipped the Italian meringue buttercream until it was as smooth as silk, and I spent an entire afternoon crafting dozens of tiny, shimmering sugar flowers by hand. My back ached, and my fingers were stiff, but I didn't mind. I was building a monument of love. As I worked, I remembered all the other times I had poured my love into things for them. I remembered the quilt I stitched for their first apartment, a project that took me 6 months, which I later saw being used as a bed for their dog. I remembered the significant check I wrote for Michael's first business venture, a loan, he called it, a loan that was never mentioned again after the business failed. I had always endured these small dismissals, telling myself that it was simply the nature of family. Isn't it strange, the small hurts we overlook for the people we love, hoping our silence will keep the peace? The final layer of the cake was in the oven. The house smelled of vanilla and almonds, and a hope so pure it felt like a prayer. I was creating a masterpiece for what I believed was my family. It's a powerful thing to build a dream for your family, isn't it? As I share my story, I find myself wondering where you are in the world listening along. It would bring me such joy if you would leave a comment to let me know where my voice has traveled to. And if you believe in the power of stories like these, please consider subscribing to Granny Stories to hear how this one ends. Of course, I didn't know then that some masterpieces are only meant to be seen by one person. The cake was finally finished on the morning of the party. It was perfect. A tower of white and gold, a monument to a 25-year love story that I had witnessed from the very beginning. All that was left was the celebration. I smoothed the front of my new dress, my heart full, and waited for my son to call and tell me when to bring it over. I was so proud. I was so ready. And I was so naive. The call from my son Michael came just after 4 o'clock. I answered with a smile in my voice, expecting instructions on the best way to transport my masterpiece. But his voice on the other end was strained, full of a false, hurried apology. "Mom," he said, and I could hear the sound of music and chatter in the background. "I am so sorry. There's been a last-minute change of plans." I felt a cold knot begin to form in my stomach. He told me a pipe had burst at the house that the caterers had canceled, that the whole party had been moved to a private room at the Oak Room, a fancy restaurant downtown. "It's just going to be a small, intimate dinner now, Mom," he said, his words tumbling out too quickly. "Just us, the kids, and Jessica's parents. Don't worry about the cake, the restaurant is handling dessert." We'll swing by tomorrow to get a slice of yours." He didn't ask. He informed. He was not inviting me into a new plan. He was politely disinviting me from the old one. I stood in my kitchen, the scent of my 3 days of labor heavy in the air, and I did what I have always done. I made it easy for him. I told him I understood that these things happen and that I hoped they had a wonderful evening. After I hung up, I walked over to the dining room table and looked at the cake. It was a beautiful, foolish thing, a monument to a celebration that was no longer happening for me. The tiny, perfect sugar flowers seemed to mock me with their silent, cheerful perfection. I slowly untied my apron and walked upstairs. I took off my party dress and hung it back in the closet, then put on my old, comfortable house robe. The act felt like a surrender. A few hours later, my phone buzzed with an incoming video call. It was my granddaughter, Lily. My heart ached at the sight of her name. I didn't want her to see my disappointment, but I couldn't bear to decline. I smoothed my hair, pasted a smile on my face, and answered. Her happy, innocent face filled the screen. "Hi, Grandma," she chirped. "Look at my party dress, isn't it pretty?" She was beautiful. But it was the background that made the air leave my lungs. She was not in a restaurant. She was in her own living room, the one I knew so well. And it was filled with people. I could see elegantly dressed guests mingling, hear the clinking of glasses, see the festive decorations I had helped her pick out. The party had not been moved. The guest list had just been edited. And then Lily turned the camera to show me the room, and I saw her. Jessica's mother, the other grandmother, smiling as she walked out of the kitchen, carrying a small, obviously store-bought cake as a chorus of guests began to sing "Happy Anniversary." Have you ever had to wear a smile for a child while your own heart was breaking in two? It's the hardest kind of strength, isn't it? I told Lily her dress was the prettiest I had ever seen. I blew her a kiss through the screen and ended the call before she could see the smile on my face begin to crumble. I sat there in the silent kitchen, the glow from my phone casting a long shadow on the table. The lie wasn't about a broken pipe or a change of venue. The lie was deeper. They hadn't canceled the party. They had only canceled me. They hadn't just replaced my cake. They had replaced my role, my presence, my very place in the family. I looked at the magnificent 3-tiered monument of my love sitting on the counter, and I finally saw it for what it was, a beautiful, elaborate, and utterly foolish mistake. The hours after the FaceTime call were the quietest I have ever known. The shock was a physical thing, a cold, heavy presence that settled in my bones and made it hard to move. I did not cry. The hurt was too deep for tears. Instead, I began to work. With a slow, methodical precision, I dismantled the celebration that never was. I cleared the dining table, folding the linen napkins back into their neat squares. I scraped the untouched side dishes into the trash. And then I faced the cake, my beautiful, foolish monument of love. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. That felt too much like violence. So with the care of a surgeon, I disassembled it. I removed each perfect sugar flower and laid it gently on wax paper. I sliced each of the 3 tiers into clean, manageable sections, wrapping them carefully in foil and placing them in the deep freezer. I was preserving the evidence of my own naive heart, tucking it away into the cold darkness. I did not sleep that night. I sat in my armchair, a wool blanket pulled tight around my shoulders, and I thought, I thought about the other part of my anniversary gift to them, the part that had not yet been delivered. The promise of a check for $20,000 to fund their dream vacation to Hawaii, a trip they were planning to take in the spring. They had rejected my presents, but I knew with a sickening certainty that they would have no problem accepting my money. The thought of them sipping cocktails on a beach in Maui, paid for by the mother they had so casually discarded, was the thing that finally turned my grief into a cold, hard diamond of resolve. The next morning, I did not call my son. I did not send an angry text. I put on my good wool coat, the one I saved for important occasions, and I drove to the bank. I walked past the friendly tellers and asked to speak to the branch manager, a woman I had known for years. I sat in her quiet professional office, and I did not tell her my story of heartbreak. I simply gave her a set of clear, irrevocable instructions. I told her to withdraw $20,000 from my savings account. This money, I explained, was not to be written as a check. It was to be used to establish a new, irrevocable educational trust fund. The sole beneficiary of this trust was to be my granddaughter, Lily. The funds were to be protected to grow and to be used only for her college tuition, untouchable by her parents. Have you ever had a moment where you knew with absolute bone-deep certainty that you had to stop building someone else's temporary happiness and start securing a foundation for the future? I signed the paperwork, my hand steady. The manager notarized the documents with a series of solid, satisfying thuds of her stamp. As I stood to leave, she looked at me with a quiet understanding in her eyes. "This is a wonderful thing you're doing for your granddaughter, Eleanor," she said. "It's the most important thing I've done in years," I replied. I walked out of the bank into the cold winter air. The paperwork in my purse felt heavier and more real than any cake I had ever baked. It was a different kind of gift, a different kind of love, one that was protected by law, not just by hope. My son and his wife were expecting a check to fund their tropical fantasy. They would never see it. Instead, I had taken their Hawaiian vacation and transformed it into a 4-year college education for their daughter. They had wanted my money without my presence. Now, they would have neither. The first move in my new life had been made, and it was checkmate. The days after my trip to the bank were strangely calm. I had fired the first and only shot in my quiet war, and now all that was left to do was wait for the sound of its impact. I did not feel anxious. I felt a sense of profound and settled peace. I went about my days. I baked a loaf of bread not for anyone else, but for the simple pleasure of the smell. I started a new book. I sat by the window and watched the snow fall on the quiet, sleeping gardens of my neighborhood. I was a woman waiting not for an apology, but for a reckoning. The expected phone call came 3 days later. It was Michael. His voice, which had been so rushed and dismissive before, was now a thick, sweet syrup of conciliation. He apologized for the terrible misunderstanding with the party. He blamed stress miscommunication, a series of unfortunate events. It was a masterful performance of a non-apology, a work of art in which no one was actually at fault. He ended his speech by inviting me to dinner at their house the following evening. "We just want to clear the air, Mom," he said, "and we really, really miss you." I knew what he was really saying. The time has come to collect the check. I agreed to go. I did not bake anything to bring with me. I did not dress up. I arrived with nothing but myself. The atmosphere in their home was thick with a forced, fragile cheerfulness. Jessica hugged me a little too tightly. Michael pulled out my chair for me at the dinner table. They were trying so hard to be the loving, attentive family they had so recently pretended not to be. We made it through the main course with a strained conversation about the weather and the children's schoolwork. Then, as Jessica cleared the plates, Michael leaned forward, his expression carefully casual. "So, Mom," he began. "We were looking at flights to Hawaii for the spring. We found a wonderful resort, and we were thinking of booking it this week. Did you still want to help us out with that anniversary gift you mentioned?" I took a slow sip of my water. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind 100 times. I looked from my son's hopeful, expectant face to my daughter-in-law's who was pretending not to listen from the kitchen. "Oh, the anniversary gift," I said, my voice light and clear. "Michael, I've already taken care of it. I made a wonderful long-term investment in the family's future just as we talked about." A look of pure relief washed over his face. "That's fantastic, Mom," he said, smiling broadly. "So you'll transfer the funds to us this week?" "The funds have already been transferred," I replied, setting my glass down with a soft click. I invested the full $20,000 into an irrevocable educational trust fund for Lily. I decided it was a much more lasting and meaningful contribution to the family's future than a one-week vacation. Her entire college education is now secure. There's a unique kind of silence that falls after you've spoken a truth that cannot be taken back. It's the sound of a power dynamic shifting suddenly and irrevocably. Have you ever been the one to cause a silence like that? They just stared at me, the fake happy smiles frozen on their faces. Jessica stood motionless in the kitchen doorway, a dinner plate still in her hand. Michael's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Their planned Hawaiian vacation, their fantasy of cocktails and sunsets paid for by my love, had just evaporated into thin air, transformed into 4 years of tuition at a state university for their own daughter. They had come to my home expecting a check, an easy transaction to fund their pleasure. Instead, I had given them a lesson in finance and in love. I had taken the gift they felt entitled to, and I had secured it for the one person in that room who had shown me a moment of genuine kindness. The air was thick with the consequences of their own actions, and I, for the first time in years, felt blessedly, wonderfully light. The dinner party ended without dessert. There was no more talk of Hawaii, no more strained, polite conversation. My announcement had detonated in the center of their carefully curated evening, leaving behind nothing but a stunned, echoing silence. I didn't wait for them to recover. I simply stood up, placed my napkin on the table, and said, "Thank you for the dinner. I can see myself out." I walked out of their house and into the cool night air, leaving them to sit with the wreckage of their own expectations. The drive home was quiet. It was not the sad, heavy silence of the night of their party, but a clean, calm silence. The silence of a decision made a truth spoken. The next day, the barrage began. My phone, which had been so quiet for so long now, buzzed with a relentless, frantic energy. The messages from Jessica were a torrent of fury and wounded pride. She accused me of using my granddaughter as a weapon, of being vindictive and cruel, of deliberately humiliating them. "How could you do this to us, Eleanor? After all we've done for you," she wrote. I had to laugh at that. What they had done for me was allow me the privilege of funding their lives while slowly erasing my own. The messages from my son were different, softer, laced with a weak, pleading confusion. "Mom, please can we just talk about this? There has to be a compromise. You didn't have to be so drastic." He did not see it as a betrayal on his part, but as an overreaction on mine. He was not sorry for what he had done. He was simply sorry he had been caught, and sorry that the consequences were now his to deal with. I read every message, and I did not reply to a single one. Their words were just noise now, the static of a station I no longer listened to. The only message that mattered came that afternoon. It was from Lily. Her text was short and simple. "Grandma, Daddy told me what you did with the anniversary money. He said you put it away for me to go to college someday. I just wanted to say that's the best present anyone has ever given me. Thank you. I love you." I held the phone to my chest and closed my eyes. Her words were a balm, a quiet and profound validation that washed away all the anger and the bitterness. Her simple, heartfelt thank you was worth more than all the polite, empty words I had heard from her parents in years. My gift had found its rightful home. My love had landed in a place where it would be cherished, not just consumed. It is a painful thing to realize. You must choose one relationship to protect another. But sometimes it is the only way to save what is truly precious. Have you ever had to make a choice like that in your own family? The angry messages from my son and his wife continued for a few more days, then slowly faded like the dying embers of a fire into a resentful silence. I didn't respond. I was building a new life for myself in that quiet. I reconnected with old friends. I started volunteering at the local library twice a week. I baked, but this time, I baked for myself, for my neighbors, for the simple joy of it. I had lost a son, perhaps at least for a time. But in his place, I had found a true heir to my love and a quiet, steady peace that was all my own. I knew with a certainty that was as warm and sweet as the apple cake cooling on my counter that I had finally made a wise investment. The silence from my son's house lasted for 3 weeks. It was a silence I did not try to fill. I let it be. I found a new rhythm for my days, one that was not dictated by the needs or schedules of others. I reconnected with old friends. I spent long, quiet afternoons at the library, losing myself in stories that were not my own. I baked, but I baked differently. I made simple loaves of sourdough bread and small batches of oatmeal cookies. I would leave them on the doorsteps of my neighbors, not as an obligation, but as a small, anonymous offering of warmth. I was rediscovering the joy of giving without the weight of expectation. The first bridge back to my family was as I knew it would be Lily. She came to visit one Saturday afternoon, dropped off by a friend's mother. She walked into my kitchen, her eyes immediately finding the cookie jar on the counter. We spent the afternoon together, not talking about the anniversary party or the trust fund, but simply being. We baked a batch of chocolate chip cookies. As we worked our hands dusted with flour, she asked me, her voice small and curious, "Grandma, what did you ever do with that giant, beautiful cake?" I didn't lie to her. "I gave it away, sweetheart," I told her gently. "I took it piece by piece down to the local fire station. I thought the firefighters deserved a celebration too." She looked at me, her head tilted, and then she smiled. "I bet they loved it," she said, and her simple, uncomplicated acceptance was a greater comfort than any apology from her parents could have ever been. When Michael arrived to pick her up, he did not wait in the car. He walked up the path and knocked on the door. It was the first time I had seen him since that terrible dinner. He looked tired, and there were new lines of worry around his eyes. He stood awkwardly in my doorway as Lily gathered her things. His eyes fell on the cooling rack of cookies on the counter. "It smells good in here," he said, his voice quiet, like it used to. It was not an apology. It was not a request for forgiveness. It was simply a statement of fact, an acknowledgement of a warmth that was no longer present in his own home. I did not offer him a cookie. I simply nodded and said, "Lily is a good helper." Rebuilding a relationship after a deep hurt is a slow and careful process, isn't it? It's less like a grand construction project and more like trying to get a tiny, fragile seed to grow again in cold, hard ground. He left with Lily a few moments later. As I closed the door, I did not feel the old familiar ache of anger or disappointment. I felt a quiet clarity. The old road back to the way things were, the road paved with my silent sacrifices and their casual expectations, was gone forever. But a new path, a smaller, more honest one, was just beginning to form. That evening, I took out my old wooden recipe box. I found a clean blank card, and at the top, in my best cursive, I wrote Lily's famous chocolate chip cookies. I was not just preserving the old traditions anymore. I was finally starting a new one. A tradition built not on obligation, but on a simple, shared joy. And it was a foundation that felt for the first time in a very long time truly solid. The seasons turned. The deep snows of that winter melted away, and my small garden began to push new green shoots up through the cold earth. And like my garden, the new life I had so cautiously planted began to grow. My weekly baking sessions with Lily became our sacred ritual. We did not speak of the past, but we built a new future. One cookie, one pie, one shared laugh at a time. The relationship with my son Michael began to thaw slowly and awkwardly. He started stopping by, not with excuses, but with offerings of peace, a bag of fresh coffee, a new book he thought I might like. We are not the same as we were. The old easy assumptions are gone, replaced by a more careful, more respectful distance. It is not perfect, but it is honest, and I have learned that honesty is a far stronger foundation than obligation. A few weeks ago, I finally took the last frozen pieces of the anniversary cake out of my freezer. For months, it had been a monument to my pain, but now it was just a cake. I invited my old friends from my book club over for tea. I served them the magnificent, elaborate cake on my simple, everyday plates. As we sat in my small, sunlit living room, sharing a dessert that was born of a great sorrow, but was now being consumed with simple joy, I knew my healing was complete. Looking back, my story feels like one of those complicated grandma true stories, the kind that don't have a simple fairy tale ending, but a real one. And I've come to believe that the most powerful grandma true stories aren't about perfect families. They are about imperfect people learning slowly and painfully how to love each other more honestly. It's a theme I've noticed in the community here at Granny Stories. We share our experiences not because they are flawless, but because they are true. And there is a profound strength in that shared truth. My son and I are still finding our way. But the foundation is different now. It is built on respect. And that, I think, is the real lesson at the heart of these grandma true stories. It is never too late to write a new recipe for your own life, one where you are the most important ingredient. I did not get the celebration I thought I wanted, but I got the life I truly needed, a life of peace, of purpose, and of a quiet, unshakable dignity. Thank you for being here for my story. If my journey of a gift rejected and a life reclaimed has sparked something in you, I would be so honored if you would share your thoughts or a piece of your own story in the comments below. Every recipe for a life well lived is worth sharing. If you know someone who needs a reminder that their own happiness is the most important ingredient, please feel free to share this story with them. And to join this wonderful kitchen of shared wisdom, please consider subscribing to Granny Stories. Thank you for listening.